felt, who was the person who came up with this idea after she attended a Berkeley PTA council meeting where parents discussed the issues and what they wish they had known when their kids went to middle and high school about transitions. Following that, we had a great discussion among families hosted by the Alameda Mosaic Educational Advisory Committee. We've been running bi-weekly family lunchtime chats, and we made the theme of one of those chats on May 6th about transitions. And we had great participation from families who talked quite a bit about their experiences transitioning from elementary to middle and middle to high school and things they wished they knew. So we brought some of the themes from those discussions to this meeting and passed those along to Family Resource Navigators who are here tonight to present on transitions. So welcome, Eileen and
Kanika.
Sorry, I knew I was going to mess it up. Thank you.
Why I did it.
Thank you so much. I'm going to flip it back to Sherry to do some quick housekeeping. And Sherry, please fill in anything I missed. But before I do that, I want to also give a big congratulations to Family Resource Navigators on getting the Family Empowerment Center grant. That's a huge deal, and we're so happy. So thank you so much for being here tonight. And again, congratulations.
Thank you. We're very happy about it too.
I'm just going to go through some housekeeping for everyone participating. This is a presentation with Q&A at the end. So just some sort of like etiquette guidelines. Please hold your questions to the end. You can either raise your hand to speak. It's easier to track you if you have your raised hand icon, but if that's not possible, I will be looking for your physically raised hand. It just might take some scrolling through. When you use the raise hand icon, it brings you to the top of my screen. If you're raising your physical hand, I will be flipping back and forth on my tiny little monitor. You can also put your questions in the chat. We are recording. Some people don't want to be recorded. So you can put your questions in the chat, and Caroline will be moderating the chat, and we will be taking turns back and forth asking your questions at the end. We request that you keep your questions fairly short, that you don't provide any personal information, you don't get too deep into the weeds with specifics. Your questions, whatever question you have, somebody else likely has that question. So we want to keep it as broad and as accessible for the audience as possible. And with all that said, I'm going to mute myself and take it away, Family Resource Navigators.
Okay, Kanika, do you want to get started and share your screen?
Sorry, I didn't run away. I had to get my air conditioning under control. All right, let me share screen. Where are we? Okay, here we go. Okay. Are you able to see my slideshow?
We see the slides and the thing. So if you can enlarge the major slide, Kanika, that would be great.
Okay, so hold on. Let me just swap the displays. Yeah, I mean.
And hi, Cheryl, if you want to jump in, please feel free. No.
No,
I was going to say, you've been living this recently, just like Kanika, so.
Hold on 1 minute.
Okay, while Kanika's working that out, I just left a message in the chat. If you want to be included in future CAC events, please drop your email in the chat. Thanks.
Yeah, perfect. That's perfect. Yep.
Perfect. All right. And if I'm looking weirdly at a different screen, it's because I have like multiple screens and like my well, we all know our Zoom issues. I've done this for about 1.5 years. So my name is Kanika Kannan. I'm the assistant director at FRN, and I'm a parent, a mentor, a volunteer, an advocate. I don't know, dog walker, and whatever else comes along the way. I have a 15-year-old daughter, and I'm living and breathing the high school experience as we go along. I'm passionate about inclusive education. I've had to really strongly advocate for my kid to be included since she was in kindergarten. I wonder why I didn't do it in preschool, but then we did get it going in kindergarten. And so all means all is something that I really live by, and I'm very vocal about it. So outside of my role in FRN, I am a CAC board member for my SELPA. And we recently had a very similar presentation that was hosted by our CAC for 2 hours. Our families did not think it was enough and asked for a day-long workshop on transitions. So we'll do our best with what we can do in the next 20 plus 20 minutes as we go along. Eileen, do you want to?
Sure. You want to change the slide,
Yes.
Kanika?
Yes.
Okay, so hi, I'm Eileen Crum. I'm the executive director at FRN. I am also and have been the training chair for COPA, the Council of Parent Advocates and Attorneys, for about 12, 15 years now. I'm also on the executive committee of the Family Resource Centers of California. Kanika and I share our love of dogs. I am a volunteer puppy raiser for Canine Companions for Independence, and that is the puppy we are currently raising. Her name is Bibi. She goes in for advanced training in about 8 weeks. So if you see me in 8 weeks, I will be sobbing. I am also the founder of FRN as an independent agency, and my kind of tagline for these kinds of things are disability rights or civil rights.
So a little bit about us. Yes, we are an FEC. Yay, we're very excited about it.
Yeah.
We are a family-to-family agency serving families in Alameda County. And what we mean by family-to-family agency is all FRN staff have experiential knowledge of systems. As a parent, I'm a parent, a volunteer who became a volunteer, was a client of FRN, a volunteer, and then a mentor parent, and then a staff member and assistant director. We have grandparents and siblings too. So we have the lived experience of navigating these systems. We are family driven, we are family centered, we are multilingual. We have staff who are bicultural, bilingual, trilingual. We serve a wide variety of languages. I think we're kind of like a model agency in how much diversity we have within our agency. And we are extensively trained. All our staff go through about 6 months plus of training in various areas, starting with strengthening families, which is what our core philosophy is. So our goal in this next 20 minutes is to give you an overview of covering the breadth of topics around transition. Transition is a really large topic. And we'll discuss many of the daily ongoing things that can happen with this transition, and also give you an overview of what it looks like when you want to plan for the future. So you've asked, and Sherry sent us a shared number of questions. And I think one of the questions was, what kind of questions should families be asking about transition? So as we go through these slides, step back, think about how each point relates to your particular child or youth, how it would impact their unique needs. And those kind of become the questions that you want to engage in with your IEP team. So you can discuss this further, think together with them, or come up with proposals as to how you would like it to be, how your child would like that to be, because they are youth as they're transitioning, and their voice and what they want to do kind of comes in and should become the centerpiece of these discussions in the future.
So Kanika, if I can just add for a minute that we're also going to talk about 5 different topics because we're running short on time.
Yes.
Already? So we need to move along.
Yes.
We're going to talk about 5 different topics, and we're going to talk about what we see as some of the challenges that occur in the transition between middle and high school, and then make some suggestions about some strategies or ideas that you might want to follow with your IEP team. So Kanika has paired those together.
Yes. So purpose of IDEA, and I think this is a very important slide, and the 3 pictures and the points are what you want to take away very strongly. to ensure that all children with disabilities have available to them a free, appropriate public education that emphasizes special education and related services designed to meet their unique needs and prepare them for further education, employment, and independent living. And that portion is really the purpose of transition planning. And that's what you need to think about. And for parents, that is something that we start thinking about even as our children enter school. Districts and IDA requires that that is thought of by the time the child gets to their 16th birthday. So that's the first distinction that we want to consider. So these are the 5 topics that Eileen talked about that we came up to as we were discussing this. So we will discuss academic schedule, differences in expectations, social connections, friends, agencies. How do you bring the child, the youth front and center in this discussion, and how can you plan for future, and what I wish I knew before my child entered this as well. So let's go ahead and talk about the first thing, academic scheduling. So when you move from elementary to middle school, for example, it is a big change. The first big thing is you think one main teacher that you had in elementary, and you have 6 teachers because you have 6 subjects, and each one you go to a different teacher, 1 or 2 classrooms to up to 6 classrooms. Tests and assignments are no longer coordinated because each teacher gets to decide what they are doing. Block schedules and passing period. If you have not heard of any of these terms, we could go about it a little bit. Homerooms. So those are some things that can come through. Scheduling can be confusing, and it is not easily workable for all youth. Most children struggle. Our children could struggle even more because they have to go through and they have to do it in like 4 minutes, which is the passing period. So transition between classes is chaotic. Our district, my daughter's high school, has 2,400 kids, and 2,400 kids are moving every 45 minutes trying to get to their next class. Final scheduling emulates college. This is specific for high school. So you will have, and this may not work for everybody. So you'll have like 2 exams per day for 3 days, 6 subjects, boom, boom, it keeps going. And they already tell you that that's for the entire semester. Extracurriculars are important. And this is hard to find because at high school, everything kind of goes through some social media. Now schools are going through social media. You could find something in Instagram, something on your website. Clubs get filled up too fast. You may not be able to find a club that is interesting and is able to accommodate for things. So things to consider. They may happen at lunchtime, at 0 period, after school. So there's a lot of elements that keep moving around. So those are things that you want to consider. What would be challenging for your child? Block schedules, for example, that means 80 to 90-minute period with one teacher on one subject. So they pretty much double up how much. It's an intense instruction block. So you want to think how that might work if your child needs breaks in between, or how what that would look like. So here are some solutions that we and ideas that we wanted to bring to you that you could consider, is that if block schedules can have breaks built into them. So you want to work with your team to figure out, to get the schedules ahead of time, to be able to build in how that might work. Students can use the buddy system. It's a good discussion to have, especially when as many students enter middle and high school, they may not want to be with an adult assistant. And if they are able to, they would rather work with peers. So it's a good thing to build. Finals can be scheduled in different ways. That's the power of the IEP team. So you can work on figuring out with your team what works for your child and what kind of accommodations they need for finals if that does not work with the school schedule. Students with IEPs can get supports and services to participate in extracurriculars. This is not even transition related. It's even in your elementary, if you have an extracurricular that's school sponsored, your child should be able to get the support they need to participate in it. So bring that up to the IEP team, and it gets more and more of a focus when they have clubs and other things that they can participate in. So the next thing that we want to talk about is the expectations are dramatically different. I mean, no kidding. PE requirements are, for example, you have to do the mile run, and it gets progressively challenging. And so you have like these really strong, stringent requirements. It is appropriate for some kids. It's not appropriate for other kids if you have very specific requirements. So these are things you need to work with that department, with those teachers ahead of time, so you're not docked. Think about uniforms. So starting from middle school, students have to go use a locker room for changing. They have to wear PE clothes, otherwise you could get docked. And this may work for some kids. This would be extremely difficult for kids in terms of physical access, or it could be something that they're not comfortable with. They are having sensory challenges with different things. So these can be accommodated, but these have to be discussed ahead of time. If you don't discuss, then that is not something that the IEP team can do anything about if it is not in your IEP. Right. That's a basic rule of our IEP. If it's not there, it doesn't exist. You don't get it.
Kanika, it's the time check is 7:07.
Sure. Your your homework. I'm going to go really fast. Your homework load is going to increase. Group projects, think about those, because that gets much more intensive, especially with Common Core. And so if it's not something you'd want to get an accommodation, it is really critical to understand the difference between modifications, which change the fundamental requirements for the student, versus accommodations, which are really supporting for access. Because this would be a very critical difference for receiving graduate or diploma, a high school diploma, versus receiving a certificate of completion in the future. So talk about the PE requirements. Consider universal design, ask for accommodations, look at volume reduction where is appropriate, not reducing the level, but reducing the quantity would qualify as an accommodation. Look for universal design in group projects. How else could your child do and show their work, demonstrate their mastery of different standards? Discuss what modifications and accommodations are needed within the IEP. Friendship, I think this takes a bit of a very different angle as kids move into their teens, and especially when you come to high school. And also think about social perceptions change about disabilities. It's harder to meet up with different schedules. My daughter did not have a single friend that she grew up with in any of the 6 classes that she started with in high school. And it really, really bothered her. That was the biggest thing for her. So that social isolation really was very troublesome and had to be addressed. In some cases, you might start seeing that there is some bullying happening about invisible disabilities, and that can accentuate as the kids are growing older, and there are some things that are not shared. So you need to start getting aware of what is being shared by your youth and what is not being shared. So I have things like, I keep asking my daughter, is this a mom's problem, or is this your own, like something that you want to may not to interfere with? So extracurriculars are a great place to make friends. So clubs are a great way, and there are neurodivergent clubs as well offered in many high schools, something to consider. Doing PE, lunch buddies, best buddies kind of clubs, scheduling lunch bunch, where their peers could meet together, having buddies to walk with them. So, and then if there is really isolation and your child is going through some kind of anxiety and depression, talk to counselors, get the support that they need and put it into the IEP that they need. So these supports are important for them. Students are expected to be much more independent in their work. So there is assignments have rigid deadlines. You could get a 0 if you don't turn in your work and you don't have an accommodation for it. So you need to get really specific about what that means. And every teacher must have a copy of that IEP accommodation that your student has. So you need to make sure of that. Expectation that students follow up with teachers independently increases. Much of teachers just provide verbal instruction in class. You would not get a note home which says all this is pending. They would just announce, and after the announcement, if it's not there, it's not there. And so more information start going directly to students. And so you're kind of not alerted. And if you need it, you got to start asking for that in your IEP. So you could ask for class notes if your student struggles with taking notes as they are listening in. You could ask for written instructions be given to your student. You could talk about how their grading should be, because their grading could be on their presentation. Maybe it's not the most beautiful presentation, but should they be docked if your child is not presenting something in MLA format because that's the expectation, or should they be docked for it, not docked for it? And this is personal experience. I
was going to say, I could hear that one was personal experience.
Just like a couple of months back as to why MLA format is not something that's really reasonable for my kid to do. So then I think we kind of, am I kind of there on time?
No, we only have a couple more minutes, right?
Okay.
And Cheryl did put that there's a resource for the dread of this month for their newsletter is on transition. So that's another place to do this. And normally, I'm sure Cheryl would agree, we do transition as usually 2 or 3 sessions of an hour or 2 a piece, just letting you know.
Absolutely.
So yeah, so please, you have a couple minutes to finish, Kanika, but that's all we've got.
All right, so let's do some planning for the future, because there were a bunch of questions around the ITP process, rarely discussed in IEP meetings early on. So most often graduation requirements, etc., never get distinctly discussed in IEP meetings. It's there, but it's not like a conversation that's actually happening. So let's talk about what your child needs to graduate. That is not happening. So, and high school may be too late for many kids to discuss this, right? And you want to start, as patterns, we want to start really early on to think about what that means. As is true for all students, and this is what I tell my team in the past, as is true for all students, we don't know we don't have a crystal ball as to what's going to happen in the senior year, but we have a plan, and we need to have a plan early on to figure out how we're going to get there. And I think that's really important. And that's something that should even be considered as early as your elementary years. Like by mid-elementary, you want to start thinking, what are these accommodations goals? Are these goals and accommodations and modifications that they are receiving now, where are they getting them? Are they making progress towards whatever goal we have set ourselves up to? IDP process could be a very hurried discussion. In the worst case, sometimes it can become like a checklist kind of thing. And the big idea is not to make that happen, because this process is the planning for what happens after school, post school. And that's the 3 things: further education, employment, independent living. And what does that mean? So think about the ITP process as really the outcomes that we want to look at for the youth, what they want for themselves, what we are thinking for themselves, how does it all come together, and the goals and objectives that will lead them there.
So the ITP process, for those of you for who this is newer, is the process of planning for transition. It is supposed to start no later than 16, though it can start earlier, right? As appropriate for the child. But the ITP is about broad goals on what we started with in the beginning, on independent living, on education, post-secondary education, and on employment, right? And that's what it's supposed to be focusing on. And you think of I always think of the ITP as a vision statement for the child, right? Where do they want to go? Where do they want to, but not the specifics of how to get there. The IEP goals from year to year are usually how we plan on how to get there, right? So when we're talking about this, we're really talking about a broad idea of, I want to go to college, not I'm going to, and yes, it's important to get down to the specifics later, but for every child, you don't want to kind of pin them down at 16 and say, hey, this is where you're going to go. You got no choices, right? We have decided, it is written, it is done. It's rather a process, an evolving process that allows a child to figure out who they are, or a youth in this case, and then move toward that with IEP goals from year to year. I'm sorry, that was one of the questions, Kanika, in the chat.
Yes, thanks, Eileen. We're just getting to the last, I think this is probably our last slide as well, and then we are opening for questions. And as Eileen talked about, what I wanted to add is it's best to start early, these discussions. Depending on
to know where your child is, right? And,
yes.
And so many times, and I'm sure for anybody else who does advocacy, this has happened to you as well. I get to be the person who tells the family that their child is 3 years behind or 4 years behind or not on track for high school graduation, because the district is not clearly communicating it to the family. So when we're talking about the questions to ask, one question to ask is, where is my child in reference to their peers, and are they on track for a regular high school diploma, right? That's something we ask in high school. In middle school, we ask, are they on track, right? Are they going to be able to catch up, and how are we going to help them catch up if that's what we're talking about? And again, this is not any judgment on any child that does not get a regular high school diploma. If we had more time, we would talk about the different paths to getting there, right? And you ask the IEP team, Liliana, that's who I would ask. I would say, hi, you're talking to me about where my child is. And I would appreciate if you would tell me, the technical word is usually grade equivalence, right? There's age equivalence and there's grade equivalence. Usually we're looking at grade equivalence. Where are they? Because you want to know where they are, not because you love your child any less if they're not going to get a regular high school diploma, but because you want to know, right? And so a lot of times, sometimes people don't know all that information. So it's really important just to say, so how are they doing with reference to their peers? You know, are they behind? Are they a little behind? You know, and when they're behind, we always want to think about what can we do to remediate? And if we try all kinds of remediation and then it doesn't work, then we want to start talking about accommodating. And again, high school diploma is not the only path to success. There are lots and lots of paths to success. But what you want to know is where your child is, so you and your child have reasonable expectations about what's going on. And that's often what doesn't happen, right? So I think that what we always say when we talk about transition planning is we always say it starts in kindergarten, right? To be honest. And we work with a lot of little kids, but it is thinking about where that child is and whether they're going to be able to get the skills that they need to progress in a typical fashion, or whether they're going to need accommodations, or whether they're going to, you know, plow their own road, all of which are fine. But we want to support that child in that road, whatever it's going to be.
Absolutely. As a parent, when my daughter was younger in elementary, the focus is more on thinking about the year to year, like really, because you're kind of drowning in just that portion. And suddenly they're youth and they're young adults, and we need to figure out how this is going, and this is going to go really fast. So it's important that when we prepare for this meeting, we are preparing with our
vision,
and trying to figure out with them what their interests are, what their strengths are, what is that they would like to do, what is important to them, what's important for them, and kind of bring together the person-centered portion of it, so you could develop a really strong transition plan and a process for it, because IDEA can support the student till they are 21 or 22. They have to work, depending on their birthday. So you could get services, you could access the IDEA services within the schools, within maybe a community college, within different programs, to get them what they need. But it starts with figuring out together what is it that is their strength and their interest, and what do they want out of their lives. So getting them engaged in those conversations.
And this is something we do with our typical children all the time, right? It's just something we often don't do with our kids who are not neurotypical or who have a variety of challenges. So what we're saying is parent the same way, you know, and plan for the future, allowing them for change at any point in time. So Kanika, Belinda is asking us.
I want to do, I'm sorry, Eileen, I just want to do a time check. Is that the end of your slides?
That is the end of our slides.
So could you close your slides,
Sure.
please? And then that'll give me an opportunity to be able to see people. Hey, there you all are. And then,
Got it.
awesome. Thank you so much. If we go over a little bit, you two, Eileen and Kanika, is that okay?
It's
Sure.
fine with me. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So, let's see, Caroline, you want to start, or if you have a question that you want to actually verbally ask, please raise your hand. Otherwise, Caroline, you want to grab a question out of the chat?
I will, and I may need Letitia's help because I think she was the first question, and her question was, how does the transition from charter school to the other school? And I'm not sure I'm clear about exactly what the question is.
Okay, so I would assume, Letitia, that you're talking about a child moving from a charter school to your local public school. I'm just going to remind everybody that a charter school is a public school and is held to IDEA, even though it's sometimes harder to get them to comply with IDEA than it is for your local public school. The transition is the same as if you were moving from one school to another. You carry the IEP. So an IEP carries from one site to another. So if it's at a specific point in time for the same sorts of things we're talking about, for the difference in schedules and stuff like that, those would all hold, right? But in general, you know, the district has to comply with an already signed IEP as best they can, right? Which is usually pretty close. And then, you know, if they feel there is a need to revisit what's in the IEP because they don't think it fits the child well, they will talk to the parents about having, you know, observations or evaluations and then revisiting the IEP. And that might be earlier than the annual, but it's usually just, I always just say to people, make sure you have a copy whenever you're moving from one site to another. It's just always a really good idea.
I want to second that because in our family lunchtime chat, we had a parent describe that when their child transferred from one high school to another, the school said they lost the IEP and it never made it to the new school. And she didn't find out for months.
Yeah, we work with a lot.
That is quite common.
Yeah. Yeah, we work with a lot of foster youth as well, and that happens all the time, right? So again, having that copy is a great idea, right? And just hand carrying it in. And don't give them your original, not ever, but give them a copy, right? Or even better, you know, use your text app, photograph them and send them a copy that way. It's harder to lose digital, right?
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Chris, your hand is up. Chris Johnson. You're next. Chris, you're also muted if you're still there.
I'm still here. That's a mistake. I need to lower my hand.
Okay, so no question. All right, well,
Question.
back to the chat then.
So I see a question, what about retention with earlier grades when you see a developmental gap, especially when not provided the developmental preschool needed for social emotional development?
So we work, and Kanika, please jump in if you want to with this. We work with a lot of little ones because we do family navigation for Help Me Grow in addition to the other things we do. We have a lot of kids going into transitional preschool. And for some kids, it can be a great idea if they need to have maturation. So the question when somebody says, let's retain your child is, what's the cause of the child not being successful in the year? And if it was maturation and it is another year, then it's probably a good choice. But if you're repeating a year exactly the same, and it's not just the child growing older and wiser that's going to make a difference, then it's unlikely that retention is going to make a difference, right? So usually when people are talking about retention, I usually start the conversation with, well, what's the reason for the retention? And are we remediating the things that are a challenge for that child? And are those remediations, those interventions, the things the school is doing, are they are they having an impact on the child? And if not, what else can we do, right? So it's a complicated question, at least for retention, and that's usually the way I go at it, right? For the little ones, it a lot of time is just that maturity. So that transitional K, that TK can be a great place. For other kids, I always ask the questions. So what is the reason for this, for this issue? And is getting a little older, if we're doing the same program, going to make any difference?
And I just wanted to add that sometimes there's pushback from districts for retention, that they do not like to retain students. And so this would be this, but what Eileen said holds true, because it's exact framework in which you can engage in this discussion. If you want to have your child retained for maturity reasons and you want them to develop socio-emotionally, but the district is unwilling to have that discussion or discuss retainment, because sometimes districts do not like to send kids to TK if they do not fit into that particular age group. And that becomes the scope of the discussion as to why that is more important for them.
So like in everything in the IEP, it's an individual decision, right? You've got to have good reasons for what you do.
Can I ask a question? Even though I know the answer, but I think it's important for the group to hear. Is that would be okay, since nobody else has their hand up right now? And that is, this has come up a number of times for me this week. Can you guys talk about the, you touched on graduation and graduation requirements, but can you talk about sort of how far back in their educational programming that the pathways towards graduation get decided, or placement impacts pathways for graduation? I've had a number of folks this week surprised that their child is on a pathway that would result in their child graduating with a certificate rather than a diploma. These are new clients, but it's definitely something not shared necessarily by the IEP team. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Again, this is very individualized. I mean, usually I start to see this breakout in 4th and 5th grade, right? Did somebody else want to say something? Okay. I usually see this start to break out in 4th and 5th grade, particularly as kids are going into middle school. This is where I start to ask the questions. I remember being as I said, an IEP of a 11th grader who was reading at 5th grade level and was doing math at 4th grade level, and his parents did not realize he was not on track to graduate, right? And so part of it is just being realistic and looking at those things on a regular basis. I don't want to use tracked, because I think that they're, sometimes with the right intervention, kids can make huge differences, right? That's the whole lesson of the Andrew F. case in 2017, that a child put in a different placement that gave him a different intervention, allowed him to make tremendous progress. So it's not always, I don't easily accept tracking, right, to one or the other. That being said, I always try to hold back the judgment, because that's not necessarily graduation on a regular schedule is not necessarily the right thing for everybody. My son took 5 years at high school. It was exhausting for him. It worked for him, right? Other kids, if they get a certificate of completion, they can try out community college. That might be a great place for them to finish, right? So there's a lot of choices out there. And I think that we have to be careful not to think about this as an either or, but are we really serving this child well? Are we giving them what is appropriate for them? Have we tried all the interventions that are reasonable for them at levels that would make an impact for them before we just, decide, no, they can't do this, right? Or they have to have it accommodated, or whatever it happens to be. At least that's my feeling for it. That being said, I tell parents a lot of times, it's not a bad deal having your child get a certificate of completion and having them be started off in community college. It can be a great thing, right, to have the district's help, because once you get out of IDEA, the world ain't so friendly, right? And getting 504 plans in college and community college are much harder, and the level of help is much less. So, it's a trade-off on both ways. But what I would say to parents is be aware of where your child is. Make sure that you and the district have high expectations about what the child can be. Be open-minded about trying different things to try to get them there. And if the child shows you that that's not where they can go right now, then accommodate them so that they can continue to learn, right?
Absolutely.
And that's usually how I think about it.
I think the only thing that I want to add, and I think Eileen said this perfectly, that parents are most often surprised or shocked when they come into this discussion and they were not expecting it. And so asking these questions as you go every grade and figuring this out, that both the district and the family is on the same page as to regards to how we are seeing the progress, and that things are appropriately ambitious is important. And that will help avoid these surprises in these conversations in the future. And
Great, thank you. Caroline, do you have a question from yourself or from the chat?
Both. One, a question that I think came up in one of our family lunchtime chats was, there are families who have been told, I think directly, that in order for their special education student to be on diploma track, they have to graduate by age 18. And I wanted to see if that was true or not. And then there's a question in the chat I wanted to share, but if we could start there.
Well, my son graduated at 20 from this SELPA, and I believe we have now answered the question.
Yes, you have. Thank you. Okay, and the question in the chat is, what happens if your child transitions and they are not successful in the program academically, socially, developmentally, mental health / anxiety, either special day or aid supported? What if they are an inter-district transfer? How is this handled? What entity is responsible for making sure that child gets the support, and who is ultimately accountable?
Oh, you wanted to ask like a million questions. But yes. That was not a question. That was 6 questions.
Sorry.
Okay, so at any point where a child is struggling and an IEP is not working, you call another IEP and you work with your team, right? It's not usually a surprise to your team, but calling their attention to it, particularly now, I think because districts have a lot on their hands with their catch up from COVID and people's learning loss, it's a good time to call their attention, call an IEP, and talk to them about what's not working. If the child is old enough or confident enough to come to the meeting and to express that for themselves, I'm all for it. That's one of the things I think is really important. For inter-district transfers, when the district takes responsibility for the child, they take responsibility for the child, right? It doesn't mean that in other years, some districts might be funky about these things, right? My experience, and Cheryl, correct me if yours is different, is that districts tend to check up on residency for people much more frequently, right? Especially like if the inter-district transfer is based on your job or something like that, than they do for kids who are more expensive, perhaps, than they do for others. That has been my experience. I don't know whether it's a truth, but it is something from my days at Dredif to now I have experienced. But a child needs what a child needs, right? And it's all about showing what is necessary for your child to have appropriately ambitious goals, right? And have the services and supports that are necessary for them to have a reasonable chance to get there. That's the entitlement, right? As refined in the 2017 court case of EventDuring. And so that's what you really want to think about. And I think when we get caught up with thinking about other things like, is this going to impact the inter-district transfer? Is this going to do this? It's going to do that. It becomes hard to advocate for the child. Now, that doesn't mean I don't do that for families that I work with. But I think that our first obligation is always for the needs of the child, because anxiety and depression and isolation, those things are really serious. If you look at, there's an LDA report from 2020 that Connick and I were looking at in preparation for this. And that is listed as, in their report, as the most frequent kind of precursors of people dropping out of school and refusing services. Because at 18, or if you don't know, at 18, your child's rights revert to them unless they've been conserved.
Yes.
And therefore the kids can decide that they don't want services anymore. And kids who are anxious and kids who are isolated, or kids who feel that, they don't, that this makes them too special for the room, right? They drop out. And so that's why I think ownership and agency of who you are and what you are is a really important thing. One of the best things, and my son graduated from Albany High, one of the best things that was done in his transition program is his team helped find mentors that were like him. People who had similar diagnoses, but were 10 years down the line.
Mm-hmm.
And having that was really such a gift to him, to have other people to talk to who, been there, done that, lived that, right? And then to take agency into your own life of making your own decisions. My favorite transition story for my son, and a lot of people have heard me tell this story, but was at 14, I signed an advocacy agreement ceding all my educational rights to my son over him. He went to his IEP and they presented his goals, and I said, you need to present it to him. I'm not the boss. And he rejected every freaking goal. And it was the funniest thing that happened, because they were looking at me like, what are we going to do? And I said, you're not dealing with me, you're dealing with them. And this was, kind of an extreme version of him exercising agency. And then, he came back to reality and realized he couldn't reject all of them. And he started working with people to refine them. But getting to that point of moving yourself from the point where things are done for you to the extent that you can, just like we do for our other kids, is giving them agency over their own lives. That becomes such an important part of independence and an independent life, right? And to my mind, a successful life.
If I did that, all my son's goals would be built around Minecraft. That would not work.
Yeah, well, it might not work for everybody, right? But everybody's got to figure out how to do it. And my son has trouble speaking. He uses a computer, and he had the clearest, right, that I have ever seen in my life. And he was hysterical, laughing the entire time. Why? Because he felt he had agencies, right? So thinking about, how do you as a parent give your child agency over their life, right? It can be something as simple as, which of the electives do you want to take? Or, which of the clubs do you want to join? To, does this work for you? Mr. Grant has been working with you on this, and we see you're still struggling in math. Has this been working for you, or what does help, right? But to bring their voice into the meeting, it's best practice, right? And as well as a very effective way of kind of moving toward those things. So at least for me, those are things that I think are really important. Go ahead, Kanika, I'm sorry.
That's what we did this year. My daughter is a freshman, and I've been asking the team to build agency, a goal around directing actions. She's an alternative communication user as well. And she has a one-on-one aid because she needs daily living supports. And so I wanted her to have that conversation. And I've had a lot of this, oh, let's talk about it, let's talk about it. And my daughter said she wants it, and it went to the goal. So it's a really powerful way of bringing the student into this. It sometimes backfires. She did reject a couple of goals that I wanted for her, but hey, that's the nature of the game. So.
And even for kids that maybe don't have such an extreme communication problem, I've worked with a lot of kids with learning issues or with autism who really enjoy being able to take control over their lives. And so what we can't do is decide at 18, poof, you're an adult, right? Everything's yours. You really have to train your child, like you train every child you have, to slowly take on more responsibility. And I know you're all here on a Monday night, on a beautiful day. You're good parents who care about your kids a lot, right? So I know you're all great parents, and I know that you know how to do this, and you are. But I just encourage people to really think about parenting their child, in a way that is going to help them to become an independent human being. And I always say when you know that you've reached that point is when they do things you don't agree with, right? That's when you know you're successful. And when they do things that really piss you off, then you're really successful.
Thank you so much, Eileen.
That's such a hard lesson though.
Yeah.
But yeah.
It is.
So last question from the audience is Cheryl. And then I think we have one more question in the chat and then we're going to be done. Okay.
Okay.
Thanks for the extra time. Much appreciated. Oh, wait, what happened to Cheryl?
Hey, you guys, can you hear me okay?
Yep.
I just a couple things. One is I just want to clarify that that transition plan that FRN is talking about that's so important, it has to be finished at 16.
Right.
That doesn't mean you have to revise, you can't revise it, because I think if anything, it isn't a good transition plan, just like it isn't a good IEP if it isn't a living document. And kids change and interests change and all that. But no later than 16 in California, and in lots of other states that are smarter than us, it's 14.
And you
have a
can ask for
transition plan.
14, right? I mean, people do all the time. You know,
The other thing I just wanted to say is that I think there's often an emphasis that I think is very counterproductive to decide which student, whether they call it high needs or, you know, students with more intensive, who need more intensive support versus, you know, less severe kids. Those distinctions are just so unuseful because there are lots of students who may have primary eligibility under something like a learning disability, but who also have a great need for help with things like independent living and so on. And there are plenty of kids who may struggle a lot with academics and may not be on diploma track, but really need support in these, you know, in the academic areas as well. So, and we certainly, just to agree with you, Eileen, we certainly see all the time people who are quite shocked to realize that somewhere in middle school, they agreed with an IEP that took their kid off diploma track and they didn't know it.
Yep.
Because the expectations were so low, there was so much segregation, child was really not given an opportunity to really see with more support if they could be successful. And those are heartbreaking stories. They're not unfixable because, like Eileen, like you can stay in special ed till 22 working on your diploma. You may not be at the high school, you might be in the adult ed program or somewhere else, but there's nothing that says you're either this or you're that. But I think there is a lot of misunderstanding at the level of sort of the direct service staff that thinks that you're either a diploma track kid, you're going to be done at 18, or you're on that transition track, and that means you're not working for a diploma, and that's just not true. That is
right. So this is why we want it always to reflect the child, right? And as Cheryl said, it's an individual education plan. It's an individual transition plan. It's not based on some stereotype of what your disability is. It is based on who you are as a person, right? And where you want to go. And so, you know, I feel like we don't trump on the, you know, we don't stomp on the dreams of other people, but we stomp on the dreams of people with disabilities. Yeah. And that's just really wrong, right? So, you know, the one that I remember as a child who told me they wanted to be a music producer, right? And, you know, the team just wanted to dissuade him. He was a person with very significant learning disabilities and some medical complexities, and they just wanted to dissuade him that this was not possible for him. And he was, you know, at 15 years old. Come on. We don't know what's possible for anybody at 15 years old, right? And so sometimes you as a parent, or for those of you who are advocates, you as an advocate, your job is to shake this up, right? To shake up the frame, to shake up the preconceptions that people have so they track people in. But that's why parents should always be asking that question. Where is my child? Where will they, you know, the way I used to ask it was, and I started asking this, I'm a little obsessive. I started asking this at 4 years old. Where do you see him in 20 years? That was always a really useful question for me to ask. Where do you see my son, right? Given what you know about him in 20 years. And the answers to that, and I almost always asked at the beginning of the meeting when I first got to know people, were so revealing about how they saw him and how they stereotyped him, right? And granted, we've met people who were wonderful and said, I don't know, where does he think he's going to be? But we also met people who said, At the very best, he'll be in a supported job somewhere, right? And that tells you a lot about what people's thinking is. So remember that what the code says is appropriately ambitious, right? That is what goals are supposed to be. That is what transition is supposed to be. Appropriately ambition, given the needs of this child, given what this child can do. And, you know, that's an evolving question. So I think it's so important for us to leave doors open. That being said, as Kanika has detailed for you, this can be a hard transition because so many things change and the world becomes so more complex, and we feel pushed out of it as parents because we don't get the kind of information we got in the elementary school. But that doesn't mean that you can't have a big influence on what happens, because they can't do anything without your signature, right? Or taking you to hearing and winning. So just remember that. Got a lot of power in this, as does your child.
Thank you so much, Eileen and Kanika. This has been fantastic. Since I think Eliza had a question in the chat that mostly was answered in the chat. So I want to flip over to Liliana because she's been so patient with her hand raised. Liliana, if you have a question, please go.
Really quickly. Thank you so much for coming and sharing your expertise and your wisdom with us. I am wondering if there's a way to reach out to like FRN and talk to somebody about making a decision for your child. Because I'm hearing how important agency is, and I want to honor that in my child. But there's some, I think, thinking I want to like have a conversation with someone that can ask me questions.
Mhm.
So that I can really support what my child is telling me, which is I don't want to go to the learning center anymore.
Mhm.
You know, and I really, I'm really hearing her loud and clear, and I want to be able to talk about this with someone, and I'm wondering if there's a space or where I can do that.
Yeah, I'm sure, you know, just shoot me an email. And I'm sure one of us can have the conversation with you. I'm sure Cheryl could have the conversation with you as well. And I would add one more thing as we talk about agency. Agency is going to differ depending on your cultural perspective, and we can't assume that everybody wants the same thing, whether that be the child or the family, right? And so for some families, independent living is an Americanized ideal that is foreign to their culture, which has communal family living. So you don't want to push your ideas on other people. You always want to be, you know, culturally humble in this and have the family and the child tell you what this is. But the quick answer is sure. I will stick my email in the chat. You are more than welcome to email me. I will find somebody to talk to you, or I will talk to you about it. No worries, glad to do it.
One last question that was in the chat, and this is the last question because we're going to have to wrap it up from here. This is Lisa. I have an IEP that we don't agree with, but doubt that this will be dealt with by our elementary school before year end. How soon is too soon to bring this up to our middle school that starts in the fall?
Monica, you want to field that one?
Oh, so I'm understanding that you want to sign your IEP with some exceptions. And
I think you need to
Yeah.
explain what that is. Yeah.
So which means that you can sign to the portions of the IEP that you agree to, and the portions that you disagree with, you can write them out as disagreements and attach this document and sign your IEP. In that form, you have 3 parts that you agree to all parts, or you agree to some portions of the IEP. And you can sign with things that you, with that saying you agree to some parts, and specifically note which parts and which parts you are disagreeing with. And I would say no time is soon enough. As soon as you say that you want to have an IEP meeting on the first day back at school, they have to have it within 30 days of school. Okay. And that's pretty much it. And so you don't want to, so it's really up to you. You have the option to just put that thing in and say that you need to meet to cover the rest of the things that you don't agree with.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so that's all of our questions for tonight. And I just wanted to thank both of you for taking time out of your busy schedules. I know that this is a really, really wild time for advocacy this last couple of weeks of this whole month of school. So we really appreciate you making time. It's amazing to me how you were able to pack so much information in such a short amount of time. As the chair of the advocacy committee, I hope that you'll come back and do more for us next year.
Well, we look forward to working with you more now that we are officially the FEC, as well as working with Dredis. So we're looking forward to that and to inviting you to our events as we hope to get back to in-person things.
Yes.
We hope. We're keeping our fingers crossed in every way possible. I will just let people know we do have our first in-person event that is launching, and I sent the flyers already to Katie, is for Arabic teas. They're in Arabic for families that are Arabic speaking. And we will be launching right behind that teas in, excuse my dog, Dari and Pashto for Afghan refugees. And so that will also be launched this summer. So hopefully we will get to the other things, but those are our first two for people who might be interested in them. And I will make sure Katie gets both of those because she's been a great partner for us getting stuff out to you all.
Great. Well, then I just want to say to the CAC community, everyone who's here tonight, if you have questions or topics that you'd like to have the education committee maybe have a workshop or a presentation, bring FRN back for, you can reach us at education@northregionsalpa.org, Katie? Yeah. And then I just want to say again, thank you on behalf of the North Region Salpa CAC for your time tonight. I want to thank Caroline for moderating the majority of this evening. Appreciate all your efforts. And it's really nice to see everybody out here. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you everyone for being here this evening, and have a wonderful rest of your night.
Have a good rest of the year, everybody.
Good night.
Good night.